So we have talked about the tuition story here now for the better part, I think, of a week, and it continues to draw attention, interestingly enough, from outside the province, something that doesn't often happen. Certainly not when it necessarily, deals with education provincially, but it is in this case. Paul Wells is a Canadian political journalist. He wrote about this the other day, and he's on the line now because we want to get a perspective somewhere outside of Quebec. Mr. Wells, thanks for being here. We appreciate your time today.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Let me begin the conversation by mentioning that you spoke to Graham Carr over at Concordia. We've talked to the principal over at Bishop's, and you raised some interesting points in your column, including the part about you're damned if you do and damned if you don't as far as this goes. Can you explain that, first of all?
Well, so the government is sometimes governments don't give any justification for what they're doing. To some extent, the Legault government is giving too many justifications, and they contradict one another. So the Minister, Pascal Derry, says, we love having students from the rest of the country. We welcome them here, and we look forward to taking more of their money to pay for the rest of the system. And the Premier is saying, I walk through the streets of Montreal, and there's way too much English, and we got to get those people out of here. And so the policy seems aimed at discouraging students from coming to Quebec, at the same time as it seems designed to take money from the students who do come. And it's because it seems like no matter what out-of-province students do with their university education in Quebec, it's the wrong thing. If they leave, go back home, or move off to the United States or to Europe or something, then they've fleeced the Quebec taxpayer for the cost of their education and left Quebec with no benefit. If they stay, they're anglicizing Montreal, and that's a problem. And so I understand why Anglophone Montrealers and parents in the rest of the country who think it might be good to have their kids go to university in Montreal or at Bishop's are frustrated, because it seems like no matter what they do, somebody in the government is going to say it's the wrong thing.
It certainly feels that way, and I'm really struggling to comprehend how hurting English universities helps French universities. I mean, I think that's the ultimate goal here.
Yeah, well, it's because of this magic formula which has existed for some time, which is that any student who pays more than the normal rate of tuition to a university, the university doesn't keep that supplementary income. That supplementary income is distributed throughout the university network.
Right.
I remember when Heather Munro Bloom was the principal of McGill more than a decade ago. She complained about this. She said, we attract international students. They pay more tuition, and McGill doesn't keep that tuition money. It goes to Rouen and Gatineau and Rimouski, and so we undertake all the cost of educating these folks, but we don't get the extra revenue. And incidentally, that explains why McGill became such a massive landlord many years ago and turned all those hotels on Sherbrooke Street into student residences, because at least they can keep the rent money of the students, even if they can't keep their tuition money.
Yeah, and that's an interesting part. I remember when we spoke to Gordon Carr, right? So you paid $9,000 to come to Concordia now. They get to keep $3,000, and they still give $6,000 to the provincial government, and the government's making it seem like, well, they're short of money. So the money is not because of the universities, as you point out. I will ask another question here, because up until now, this whole idea, when this was first introduced, of it being a financial issue made no sense and still doesn't make sense. The government's trying to tell us, well, this is how much it costs, and yet this is how much economic impact these students have when they come here. And net, we still make money with these students. And the second part of it is, and perhaps you can explain this, it's not simply about students who are here for law degrees or going to study medicine. I think Mr. Carr also pointed out that in the case of kids here for just a BS or a Bachelor of Arts degree, they're paying more even now before they double this than they would have been to stay at home or go someplace else anyway.
Yeah. So Principal Carr, of course, is Concordia is one of Canada's great fine arts programs. If you want to be in film studies, if you want to be an artist, if you want to run an art gallery, Concordia is a pretty good place to go. And so there's a lot of kids from Nova Scotia who could go to NSCAD, the very good arts college in Halifax, but it's even better if they get to go to Concordia, among other reasons, because Concordia is in Montreal, which is, frankly, a more interesting city. And but they're not going to come if they're going to have to pay twice as much tuition. And so, I mean, look, any jurisdiction has the right to charge the tuition it wants, and Quebec would hardly be the first place to charge way more tuition for out-of-province students than for in-province students. That's basically the way every public university in the United States operates. But the effect of that is that Alabama kids stay in Alabama, and Oklahoma kids stay in Oklahoma,
right.
And they don't get the best education of all the education on offer. And to go back to my first point, it would be good if they had some clue of what it is they're trying to achieve. If they're trying to discourage, let's be honest, Anglophone kids from coming into Quebec, then they can't also expect to take more of their money. They should do some kind of serious study, an econometric study, to show how many kids are going to decide not to come because of this policy. And short of that study, then they're just talking into their sleeve.
Mr. Wells, we have Francesco Amodio, who's from McGill. He's an associate professor in their economics department. I know he published something in the Devoir the other day. Mr. Amodio, you've heard what Paul Wells had to say. Can you give us McGill's take on this right now? And I know you're speaking, I'm not sure that you're speaking on the university's behalf, but from what you published, what's bothering you about this proposed change?
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me. And I concur with many of the things that were said here. I think what bothers me in particular is that this idea of kind of rebalancing the Anglophone and the Francophone university networks. So I'm kind of taking that is the objective, as Pascal Derry, the Ministry for Higher Education, stated. But then let's suppose that is the objective. I'm not at all convinced that the measures that are being on the table are the best ones, are the only ones that we could possibly put in place in order to achieve this goal. So let's talk about the University of Montreal, for instance, and which is, I think it's pretty telling that no one is talking about University of Montreal, which has, and I read from their website, it has more than 10,000 international students, which makes it the third most international university in Canada. So I think there is at least one Francophone university that seems to be doing really well and seem to be doing something right in terms of attracting international students and boosting revenues through that. So my point is, why aren't we trying to understand how to help Francophone universities to do that as best as they can, to tap into international talent, international students who can boost their revenues, and instead, to achieve this objective of rebalancing between these two networks, what we're doing is to harm the Anglophone universities to make them, less attractive, and to basically, harm what are the most reputable internationally and most attractive places that we have here for higher education.
The thing that comes to mind for me right away is the fact that we have agreements with Brussels and France that those students coming here, international students coming to study here, don't pay any additional fees. So they pay what a Quebecer would pay to study here. So would that be something to look at, to change, or do the universities ultimately benefit from that? How should that work?
Yeah, I think that is perfectly telling of this kind of schizophrenic approach to these issues, because on the one hand, we are making easier for international students from France and Belgium to come here on the ground that, we want our Francophone universities to be attractive for these students because we think there's talent there and we want that talent. But on the other hand, now we're trying to do the opposite by making it harder for Anglophone universities to do the same. But France, I think there are other things that can be done. And I think that, holding, even if you want to keep that minimum bar of 20,000 as the amount that you want to charge on international students, I think there can be government initiatives to promote the Francophone universities in Quebec, in Francophone world. There are examples at University of Montreal, as I said, at University of Sherbrooke. They have a doctoral program in development economics that is able to attract students from Francophone Africa at a very high rate. So why can't we help other Francophone universities to do the same? And I think universities in Quebec would be particularly attractive because universities in France, they have a very hierarchical. The university system in France is very hierarchical. You have these like top-notch universities, and then all the rest are kind of lagging behind. Here in Quebec, we're able to. I think the universities that we have, the Frankfurt University in Quebec, they're right in the middle, and they're able to attract students that don't make it to the top. International students from Francophone, say Africa, that don't make it to the top French institutions. They could really well be attracted by University of Montreal, by University of Quebec and Montreal, and so on.
We have to wrap it up here. I will take your point and suggest that we did hear the other day, at least from one member of the opposition, suggesting this is a very bad plan for a problem that does exist. So hopefully, to your point, before the government goes ahead and tries to push this through, they can come up with a different approach to how to deal with this. At least that's what we can hope. Mr. Wells, Mr. Amodio, I thank you both. We appreciate your time.